On November 18th, 2006, torches and fireworks lit up the Odescalchi Castle outside of Rome as Tom Cruise married Katie Holmes in what tabloids dubbed the wedding of the century. The guest list was absolutely stacked with actors like Will Smith and athletes like David Beckham, but the real MVP at this wedding was Tom Cruise's best man, David Miscavige, the leader of Scientology, the religion that Tom Cruise is famously associated with. But someone at the wedding is clearly missing. Like a scene out of Austin Powers. There's a chair with a name.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody sitting in the chair.
Come on, Dad, stand up and take a bow.
The missing person is Shelly Miscavige, the unofficial first lady of Scientology, the wife of David Miscavige. She's nowhere to be seen and she should absolutely be there. Actress Leah Remini, who was a Scientologist at the time, asked where Shelly was to other church leaders and she was admonished or told off.
I asked the spokesperson at the time, Tom Davis, where is Shelly? I think it's weird that she's not here. And he said, you don't have the effing rank to be asking about the leader's wife. And I felt that I did have the effing rank to ask where a human being was.
And after Tom Cruise's wedding, no one would see Shelly Miscavige in public again. So how exactly does the first lady of $1 billion religion disappear in plain sight? First, we need to go back a little bit and learn about who Shelly Miscavige is and how important this is. By the way, I made another Scientology video a few weeks ago with more general information if you want to check that out. Shelly Miscavige was born Michelle Diane Barnett in 1961, and she was groomed into Scientology before she could even walk. Shelly's parents, Barney and Flo Barnett, weren't just casual believers in L. Ron Hubbard's movement, they were true believers. They were the kind of people to completely sacrifice their kids' childhood for what they saw was the true salvation of mankind. When Shelly was barely old enough to understand what was happening to her, her parents made the decision that would define the rest of her life. They signed her up for Scientology's most elite and demanding organization, the Sea Organization, or Sea Org, as it's known to outsiders, or a human trafficking ring, as it's also known to outsiders. It's not a summer camp or some kind of boarding school. It's a billion-year commitment to serve L. Ron Hubbard, this guy. It's a billion-year commitment, and the intention is to serve his vision of clearing the planet. A billion years. In Scientology, cosmology, your souls are eternal and reincarnation is an absolute fact, so signing the contract is just kind of part of it. So Shelly signing this doesn't mean she just serves the organization in this lifetime, but also in every lifetime to come. By the time Shelly was 12 years old, she found herself aboard a converted cattle ferry called the Apollo, which sailed the Mediterranean as a part of L. Ron Hubbard's floating headquarters. But Shelly wasn't just in any position on the ship. She had been chosen by L. Ron Hubbard as one of his personal Commodore's messengers, which is a cadre of children who acted as the founder's direct representatives and personal attendants. So, that sounds crazy. These kids were powerful in Scientology. To understand how much power they actually wielded, you have to understand that L. Ron Hubbard wasn't just the founder, he was also the most important man on earth in the eyes of the doctrine. And the Commodore's messengers were Hubbard's eyes and ears throughout the organization. They were his little birds. They carried his orders, they observed everything, and they reported back directly to him. They were trained to speak with his authority, to think like him, and to essentially become extensions of his will. So for a young girl like Shelly, this meant growing up in an environment where a normal childhood and normal childhood experiences, such as playing with friends, going to school, developing your own kind of identity, these things were replaced with the intense responsibility of essentially serving as a conduit for what Scientologists believe was the most important man on earth, the Jesus of Scientology. On top of that, life aboard the Apollo was unlike anything most people can imagine now. The ship housed hundreds of Scientologists, all living in cramped quarters while sailing from port to port across the Mediterranean. And Hubbard ruled this floating kingdom with absolute authority, and the children who served as his messengers were both privileged and burdened by their proximity to his power. They wore these ridiculous naval-style uniforms, they carried official duties, and were expected to maintain the same level of dedication and discipline as the adults that were around them, the leaders of Scientology. And it was during these formative years that Shelly's path would intersect with another young Sea Org member who would fundamentally alter the course of her life and the life of Scientology, David Miscavige. He was born in 1960 and was just a year older than Shelley when he too found his way into Hubbard's inner circle. And like Shelley, David had been raised in a Scientology family from childhood, his family having joined the movement when he was just a wee lad. He's still a wee lad, by the way. But he was even more wee at one point. By David's early teens, he had already demonstrated the kind of fierce loyalty and organizational skills that caught Hubbard's attention. He joined the cadre of little birds. And the relationship between Shelley and David began during these years on the Apollo and continued as they both rose through the ranks of the Sea Org. And in 1982, when Shelley was 21 years old and David was 22, they married in a Scientology ceremony, which is it's really strange. Their weddings are really odd and their ceremonies are bizarre. But this specifical union was not a union between two young people in love. It was a merger of two of the most promising members of Scientology's next guard, both of whom had been groomed from childhood to serve the organization's highest purposes. And by the time of their marriage, both Shelley and David had already established themselves as key figures in Scientology's leadership structure. David had become one of Hubbard's most trusted lieutenants, known for his ability to implement the founder's vision with ruthless efficiency, and Shelley, meanwhile, had carved out her own significant role within the organization. She became known as the Cobb Assistant, or the Chairman of the Board Assistant, which is a position that gave her even more considerable influence over the day-to-day operations of Scientology's management. So she went from being a saint to in a leadership managerial role for the business of Scientology. Business was a booming in the 80s, by the way. The early years of David and Shelley's marriage coincided with one of the most turbulent periods in Scientology's history. L. Ron Hubbard, the man who shaped their lives, the God King on Earth or whatever, was becoming increasingly reclusive and more of a hermit and even more paranoid than he already was. And by the early 1980s, he had retreated from public view entirely, leaving the day-to-day management of Scientology to a younger generation of leaders like David Miscavige and Shelley.
Mr. Hubbard, many millions of words have been said and written about Scientology, but I think there's still quite a lot of doubt in many people's minds as to exactly what it is. What is Scientology? How would you describe it?
Well, it's very interesting. You've just asked a question like, what are the contents of the Encyclopedia Britannica? Answer in one word.
Then a few years later, L. Ron Hubbard died shitting on the toilet. I heard that, at least. I'm not sure if that's true. And David Miscavige emerged from the power struggle that followed as Scientology's new leader. At just 26 years old, he had successfully outmaneuvered older, more experienced rivals to claim control of the organization. How? I would love to see that. I would love to see how exactly that happened, because that's quite a dramatic rise to power, and that entirely transformed not only his role within Scientology, but also his wife's role within Scientology. Overnight, she had gone from being the wife of a rising star to the unofficial first lady of a religion. And business, all right? I don't know where I heard that he died shitting on the toilet, though. I'm not sure where I heard that. It was Harry, he told me. So in Shelley's new role as the First Lady, she had considerable influence, as you can imagine. Even more considerable to wield than she previously had. She was involved in major decisions, she participated in high-level meetings, and served as one of her husband's most trusted advisors. And those who worked with her during this period described her as someone who wasn't afraid to speak her mind, even to David. So she wasn't exactly demure or beaten down. And that detail is especially important when you take into consideration the organization's ideals. It is an organization that requires absolute obedience to leadership. It's demanded at all times, and Shelley's willingness to challenge that, is potentially not good for the long term. And for nearly 2 decades, Shelley served as one of the most visible and powerful women in Scientology. She appeared at major events, participated in important ceremonies, and was seen as an integral part of the organization's leadership team. And to the outside world, and to most Scientologists, she seemed to be living the life of someone who had achieved the highest levels of success possible within the movement that she had served since childhood. So there was a level of respect there from everyone around her, and people, Scientology didn't seem all bad for a while. You'd think, after knowing all this, it would be very important for her to show up at Tom Cruise's wedding. It's an important ceremony, it's a massive, high-profile event, but alas, nowhere to be seen. 9 months after the wedding, Shelley did surface once, so I lied. She didn't disappear from public forever after this. She showed up one more time at her father's funeral in August 2007. And when Leah Remini walked out of Scientology's HQ for the final time in 2013, she really wanted to know what happened to Shelly Miscavige. She was very interested in that and posed the question and made it a huge deal.
And since then, do you know where Shelly Miscavige is now?
I do not. I filed a police report. I did not receive an actual, the person who was in charge of the case said that it was classified, which is not usual.
Leah soon filed a missing persons report for Shelly, and the LAPD's response was swift, but as we'll later discover, it was deeply flawed. Within weeks of the missing persons report being filed, they claimed to have found Shelly, located her, and they closed the case, marking it as unfounded. And for 10 years, this seemed to be the end of the story. The LAPD said, she's fine, totally fine. But of course, they didn't say this until they were hounded by the public and Leah Remini in a missing persons report. They didn't just care before that, obviously. But according to them, Shelly's alive and well, and the case is closed. If we skip ahead to 2023, investigative journalist Yashir Ali would blow this narrative apart with an investigation that revealed the LAPD's handling of the Shelly Miscavige case. It revealed it to not only be incompetent, but potentially corrupt. And what Ali uncovered through months of investigation, FOIA requests, and interviews with law enforcement kind of makes the LAPD look worse, or even worse, bad. One of America's largest police departments. The story that Ali pieced together reads like a manual on how exactly to not conduct a missing person investigation, which I don't know anything about that. All right, I don't know how to conduct one of those, but it seems really dumb. Shelly Miscavige appeared in a photograph, not at a Scientology event, but in a DMV photo taking for a driver's license renewal. And people who knew Shelly in reaction to seeing this photo said she looked much worse than she did, which is really mean, but also very sad because she hadn't been seen in a photograph since 2004. When the LAPD claimed to have located Shelly in 2013 after Leah Remini's missing persons report, they arranged a meeting at a coffee shop in West Covina, a location specifically chosen by Scientology's high-powered attorney, Jeffrey Riffer. So that's the first red flag. I'd say in a legitimate missing person investigation, the police would determine when and where and how contact would be made with the subject, not a lawyer and some whack-ass Bingus location, all right, that they might have influence or control over. It does get worse though, in case you were wondering. At this coffee shop, LAPD detectives collected fingerprints from the woman that was claiming to be Shelly Miscavige, and when these fingerprints were compared to Shelly's fingerprints on file with the California Department of Motor Vehicles, they could not be conclusively matched. So they weren't her fingerprints. It's inconclusive. How the is that possible? So there's reasonable doubt as to whether or not the woman that they met was actually Shelly Miscavige. I would say, once again, from my unexpert opinion, in any competent investigation, inconclusive fingerprints would result a mandate for further verification of who the this person is. DNA testing, dental records, extensive questioning, auditing, if you really want to go into it, verification of identifying marks, scars, interviews with family members who hadn't seen the person in years. There's plenty of things that you could possibly do here. But instead, the LAPD did something that defies common sense, logic, and the standard procedure of the police. They closed the case anyway and removed Shelly from the missing person database the very same day they received the inconclusive fingerprint results. What the It's almost like they're on the payroll of Scientology, allegedly. I'm just gonna say allegedly. I don't live in LA. I don't give a okay? The quality of the fingerprints themselves raises even more disturbing questions. Forensic experts who reviewed the evidence told Ali that the prints were of such poor quality that it could potentially suggest the person who provided them may have been trained in techniques to avoid leaving matchable fingerprints. So the fingerprints are a massive violation of procedure, but it didn't end there. During the entire encounter, the LAPD failed to inform the woman they met that she was the subject of a missing person report. They didn't tell her that Leah Remini had filed the report, and they didn't ask her about her whereabouts for the past 8 years. since she hadn't been seen in public. They didn't inquire, they didn't want to know, they didn't ask any questions. So in essence, they allowed Scientology to control every aspect of what should have been a police-conducted interview. And most troubling of all, the security footage from the West Covina coffee shop where this meeting took place was found to be mysteriously unusable, scrambled, if you will. That's the only visual evidence of whether or not Shelly Miscavige was actually present at the encounter. It was conveniently destroyed, corrupted, from rain, or maybe a hairy rat. Maybe a hairy rat got into it.
It was I, the rat.
Shut up. And when this investigation from Ali was published in 2023, it was a pretty big deal. I heard about it. You probably heard about it. We had an investigative reporter with sources that documented evidence that the LAPD either was spectacularly incompetent in handling a missing persons case involving a very high-profile person, the First Lady of Scientology, or something far more sinister occurred. Hypothetically speaking, on an alien planet, let's say there is a police department, and it's called the AAPD. And this police department accepts money from a hypothetical religious organization on this alien planet called Religiontology. Let's say they're paying this police department and they say, hey, we'll give the leaders of this organization millions of dollars, maybe pay out your pension, do all kinds of stuff early, we'll be in your back pocket if you want. And in return, do a really bad job investigating when people go missing that are connected to us. Aliens, not people. When aliens go missing that are connected to us. Billion-year aliens. I would ask, hypothetically, on that alien planet where all this hypothetical is taking place, how many other missing alien cases have been prematurely closed because the subject organization Religiontology provided convenient explanations and the AAPD failed to conduct proper due diligence because of the reason that Religiontology is paying them money? I don't know. It really seems quite absurd when you think about it. Absurd like this. Rocket Pop, Sour Boys, Sour Candy. For the 4th of July, celebrate America celebrate us by going to sour.gg and buying some Rocket Pop flavored sour strips. You've had Rocket Pop, I'm sure. This is an ad, by the way, but not really though. I own this company. We also release 4 new flavors every month, and this month we're releasing our most sour flavor of all time. So go to sour.gg, support the channel. So yeah, we have a hypothetical situation in which Religiontology's influence within the law enforcement agencies of planet Bidu. All right, it's a big question now. Like this hypothetical planet, for decades on our planet, former members of an organization unrelated to Religiontology called Scientology allege that Scientology maintains relationships with police departments, district attorneys, and other law enforcement agencies for, I'm sure, their love of the law, I guess. The question remains, where is Shelly Miscavige, and if the woman the LAPD met in 2013 that they said was Shelly Miscavige wasn't Shelly Miscavige, then where is she? Because so far, there's more evidence that that was not Shelly Miscavige than there is evidence that it was. Because of the inconclusive fingerprints. If the fingerprints were inconclusive and she hasn't been seen in public, since that single encounter over a decade ago, nobody still cares. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Unbelievable. So where could Shelly Miscavige be? If you believe the accumulated testimony of former Scientology executives, the answer could lie somewhere hidden in the mountains of Lake Arrowhead, California, at a facility that sounds, honestly, like a maximum security prison or some kind of evil base from Austin Powers, Dr. Evil, another Austin Powers reference, 2 in 1 video. Press like, I guess. It's a religious retreat, the Church of Spiritual Technology's Twin Peaks compound. Spans 52 acres of forested mountainside and is a fortress disguised as a spiritual sanctuary. There are 16 buildings there, all connected by underground tunnels and protected by what security experts describe as ultra barrier fencing. That is military installation fencing around a religious retreat or whatever. Motion sensors, security cameras, conveniently there, unlike at coffee shops owned by them, or whatever, allegedly. This does not seem to be a place that you visit casually. It is a place that seems like people disappear to. According to multiple former Sea Org members, they believe Shelly Miscavige has been imprisoned, essentially, at Twin Peaks since 2005-2006. Leah Remini tweeted in 2023 that she believed Shelly was being held at a Scientology base, captive, essentially, and other former Sea Org members have said that Shelly is imprisoned at Twin Peaks. So this is probably the location. The theory that is supported by Leah Remini in her tweets from 2023 after this Yashir Ali investigative journalism thing, the big question, where is Shelley, came back up. The theory is that Shelley lives under constant surveillance at a Scientology base, most likely Twin Peaks. And this constant surveillance is not just cameras, but by 3 handlers. Shelley has 3 handlers, each chosen for their particular skills in psychological manipulation. Leah Remini said that Antonella TC served as Shelley's auditor, and in Scientology terms, that's a therapist and interrogator, kind of. It's like someone who finds your deepest, darkest shit and then makes you talk about it and then records it for blackmail later, or something to do with like freeing your soul or something, I forget. But Antonella's job is to monitor Shelley's mental state and extract rebellious thoughts, potentially. Another one of Shelley's handlers, according to Leah, is Ann Yosem. Both of these women have been described as notorious and ruthless Sea Org members by former Sea Org members with a dark background, I should say. A very dark, these people are bad people, apparently. So Shelley's surrounded by auditors, handlers, people who are not her friends, people who use the same coercive techniques that Scientology uses to break down the will of its other members, which we have a lot of proof of.
Former senior insiders claim the church's current leader, David Miscavige, has created and encouraged a climate of violence within senior staff and was frequently violent himself.
It's mind-boggling to me that this just isn't a bigger deal, I guess. It's a big deal on the internet, and Leah Remini made it a pretty big deal. She had the whole, leave from Scientology massive fame web, which was awesome to see, but it's so creepy. Sure, maybe she wants privacy. Maybe Shelley wants privacy. I'm not totally sure. Just tell us. Tell people where you are. People will be way less mad at your organization if you just tell us where you are. People will still be definitely mad, I'm sure, because of all the other stuff, but just like pop a head out. A couple years after the missing persons report and the DMV photo in 2017, a voter registration record showed that Shelley registered from a Scientology facility. That was the registered address, the remote Petrolia compound in Northern California, which is even more isolated than Twin Peaks somehow. Unfortunately, there is a bunch of people who were in Scientology during 2004 when Shelley really stopped showing up, and all the way to 2015-16, there are people who are in the organization who claim to have seen Shelley, and then they left. That's how they were able to claim that they saw Shelley. Of course, Scientology does not weigh in on that, but people who have left the church have claimed to have seen her. There were quite a few possible sightings, and all of these people that claim they saw her, like some kind of cryptid, seems like she's a cryptid at this point, they claim that she was accompanied by some handler or watcher, which corroborates with what Leah Remini said. It's interesting because it doesn't seem like a great life to be in Scientology, to be so high profile in an organization that is genuinely hated, and people who leave it can make a big deal out of it, and they're seen as like good people, right? Because it's crazy, it's a cult, and people speculate and believe that Shelley is hostage essentially, or maybe she's dead or something along those lines. There's also the possibility that she's just psychologically ensnared. It is pretty human. You can read about cults all you want, and you will consistently see the same exact pattern of psychological manipulation, environmental control, mystical, spiritual manipulation, some kind of demand for purity, confession, some kind of magical science, using certain types of speak, and the emphasis of doctrine over humans. All these things culminate into having control over someone entirely. And when you take that person and you dip them in this when they're a child, it's unlikely that that system doesn't have entire control of them, and has for decades.
Sure.
They'll disagree with someone in the church who outranks them, and that person will just start hitting them.
Correct.
And they say no one in the room will do anything, and the person who's being assaulted actually says, I didn't do anything, I just stood there and let them hit me.
Right.
And I watched that as an adult, and I don't understand how that's possible.
It's possible because if you believe that you have barred freeing mankind, that your transgression of not putting a cup where it should be, or giving
somehow
somebody
impeded the progress of the church. Yeah.
Correct. And so they start to believe that they deserve to be.
They deserve this punishment.
Correct. And that's how it has continued.
You're taught in Scientology that when you leave the religion, it means a spiritual death, and that the outside world is dangerous and filled with enemies, and that your purpose is to serve the greater good of the organization. So for Shelley, this could mean something very bad, obviously. or she could believe that it means something very bad. I just don't see that. She seemed like a smart person. So to this day, nobody definitively knows where Shelly Miscavige is. And I feel like this story would be incomplete without talking about some other people who went missing or are missing in regard to Scientology. There are a surprising amount of deaths that have been linked by people to Scientology. The most high profile is the tragic death of Lisa McPherson. I would say that this tragedy fully encapsulates the sometimes lethal consequences of Scientology's anti-medical doctrine. A lot of people talk about this when they talk about Scientology. They say, well, they're against psychiatry, they're on to something.
You don't know the history of psychiatry. I do.
Yeah, but like, you can just be like against a little bit of that, but also recognize that people sometimes can fundamentally have things wrong with their brains and they need medical help from the modern medicine stuff. What's crazy is that most of the praise you see for Scientology is a result of propaganda that they push forward. They say they're anti-psychiatry, you should be able to solve your own problems and all that. They try to appeal to that, which is totally viable, right? Like, you can definitely take your health seriously and be disciplined and do things to improve your mental health, but sometimes there's just something wrong in your head and you need help, and that's completely fine, and you shouldn't have to kill your soul in order to, like, it's so dumb. Most of the praise that you see for Scientology online is as a result of that idea. It resonates with a lot of people, it seems, and I would say that idea is the face of institutional negligence when we're talking about Scientology, of course. On November 18th, 1995, Lisa McPherson, the 36-year-old Scientologist, was involved in a minor car accident in Clearwater, Florida, one of the HQ areas for Scientology. What normally would have been a routine incident was the beginning of a 17-day ordeal that would end in her death and expose the Scientology's spiritual care. Following the accident, Lisa was taken to Morton Plant Hospital, where she exhibited clear signs of mental distress. She removed her clothes and was telling paramedics she needed help, and a psychiatric evaluation was recommended by the professionals there, but Lisa's fellow Scientologists intervened, her handlers, I guess. They were armed with the church's rigid opposition to psychiatry. They convinced the hospital to release Lisa into their care, promising to watch her 24 hours a day and ensure that she received the proper attention. That is mind-boggling. Why would they allow her to go, for one? I mean, how the f did that happen? That's just so crazy to me. What followed this was not care as much as imprisonment. Lisa was taken to Fort Harrison Hotel, which is Scientology's spiritual headquarters in Clearwater, where she was placed in room 174 and subjected to introspection rundown, which is a Hubbard prescribed treatment for those experiencing what he termed a psychotic break. The procedure is insanely cruel. It is complete isolation with attendance of the prisoner, instructed to remain silent except when absolutely necessary. The theory behind this is that the individual would eventually snap out of their condition through introspection alone, which is insane. That makes no sense at all. And Lisa never snapped out of anything, and for 17 days she was held in that room, essentially in isolation, while her condition deteriorated rapidly. And the reports by her watchers that were later obtained by investigators show a systematic neglect. Over that time, Lisa became increasingly violent. She was hitting walls and the people trying to care for her. She stopped eating, lost a dramatic amount of weight, and developed pressure sores from lying in bed so much. Her fingernails grew long and dirty. She was scratching herself and trying to scratch others during her physical and mental decline. And with the church's own records, a caretaker there wrote about Lisa being like an ice cube. She had foul breath and appeared ill. So they were clearly neglecting her. It was clearly horrible. And another caretaker described her looking as if she had measles or chickenpox on her face. So despite those alarming observations, no real medical professionals were called to examine her, and instead the watchers of her continued their Scientology vigil, all while force-feeding her protein shakes and aspirin through a turkey baster when she refused to eat. So yeah, the Scientologists got in over their heads. It's a real quote from them. And by December 5th, Lisa had lost that 30 pounds and was severely dehydrated. It was only when a caretaker finally recognized the signs of sepsis and soon death that the decision was made to take her to a hospital. But they didn't take her to the Morton Plant Hospital, the one that was 5 minutes away. They went to Newport Richey Hospital, which was 45 minutes away, where Dr. David Minkoff, a fellow Scientologist, was on duty. Thank you, Dr. David Minkoff. This same Scientologist, Dr. David Minkoff, that a couple years ago, according to a lawsuit, was begged by a woman, Whitney Mills, for mental treatment shortly before taking her own life. So Lisa McPherson was dead on arrival at the Newport Richey Hospital, which was 45 minutes away, okay? The autopsy would reveal the full extent of her suffering. Severe dehydration, blood clots, cockroach bites on her body, and evidence of prolonged bed rest. All of these things had ultimately killed her. She died alone, completely abandoned by a system, and also church staffers who were caretaking Lisa while she was in isolation requested from Dr. David Minkoff antibiotics, saying that she seems to have an infection, and he denied that. So, like, why is this? He's still a doctor. Alternative medicine's totally fine, okay? But when you're a Scientologist, it's not good, and you're dealing with a mental episode. Don't trust alternative medicine when it comes to having a psychotic break, all right? Nothing's going to help you. You need medicine for sure. Shortly after Lisa's death, her room was cleaned up, refurnished, and they replaced the 2 beds that were in it with 1 king-size bed to obscure evidence of imprisonment. And most damning of all were the reports from Lisa's 3 final days were just gone. They got surveillance cameraed. I wonder why? Hypothetically speaking, they could have contained vast evidence of criminal negligence. Since someone died and they couldn't immediately cover it up and create a shore story, which is like one of their Orwellian words for creating a false narrative to cover something up. It's a Sea Org thing. This case sparked investigations by local, state, and federal authorities. The state of Florida filed criminal charges against the church for abuse of a disabled adult and practicing medicine without a license, but Scientology's deep pockets and extremely aggressive legal tactics eventually prevailed. After apparently spending $30 million on the case, the charges were mysteriously dropped, and the civil lawsuit that was filed by Lisa's family dragged on for nearly a decade before being settled out of court for undisclosed terms. So that's an example of very clear lethal consequences that were the result of the doctrine of Scientology, which makes the whole thing with Shelley that much more disturbing and scary. So Shelley and the case of Lisa aren't the only suspicious things in regard to Scientology. At just 27 years old, Alexander Yinsk was found dead at his in-laws' home in Sylmar, California, under circumstances so bizarre that investigators immediately opened an inquiry, and circumstances so suspicious that his own mother said the circumstances were suspicious. Alexander's father was Heber Yinsk, or the international president of the Church of Scientology, a position that should maybe have afforded his family considerable protection within the organization, and I don't know, seems like everybody else up there is living like kings. But Alexander's mother, Karen de la Carriere, had committed the unforgivable sin of leaving Scientology in 2010, making her son a potential liability just by association. That's why Scientology has the disconnection policy that we talked about in the last video. If you leave Scientology, you become an SP, and then everyone in your family still in Scientology disconnects from you. Firstly, the timeline of Alexander's death raised the most immediate suspicions. According to official reports, he was seen alive at 9 a.m. on July 2nd, 2012, sleeping at his in-laws' home, and by 9 p.m. that same evening, he still hadn't moved, but remarkably, nobody checked on him. He just slept the whole day away. It wasn't until the following morning that his father-in-law discovered him completely unresponsive, and even then, the response from the father-in-law was inexplicably delayed. The man took time to drive a child to school before finally calling 911 to report his... What? After this, the LA County Coroner's Office found the delays deeply suspicious, and a spokesperson revealed that investigators had serious questions about the actions of Alexander's in-laws and the timing of events surrounding his death, because it was so suspicious. The suggestion was maybe someone just allowed Alexander to die without seeking help, and then had delayed reporting his death for some reason. Finally, and most telling, Karen de la Carriere, his mother, was banned from seeing her son's body because of her status as an ex-Scientologist being disconnected from. It's even enforced in death and prevents a grieving parent from visiting the body of their child. So weird. Karen pointed out, similarly to Lisa, that her son had been dealing with health issues following a traffic incident, but the church that claimed to heal all ailments offered nothing but neglect to him. and Lisa. So the autopsy was completed, but toxicology results and a final cause of death were kept confidential. All we know is that it was incredibly suspicious, and even his own mother believes that. Why would you delay the reporting of someone who had died in your home if it's your son-in-law? That doesn't make any sense. I mean, that doesn't make any sense at all. Not even a small amount. And there is another case for Scientology in regard to all of this. That is the case of Jeremy Perkins. On March 13th, 2003, L. Ron Hubbard's birthday, a high holy day in Scientology, a celebration, 28-year-old Jeremy Perkins stabbed his mother, Ellie, to death in their Buffalo home, delivering 27 knife wounds in a frenzied attack that was mind-boggling and shocking. Unfortunately, this was all the result of Jeremy being a textbook case of completely untreated paranoid schizophrenia, a condition that could have been properly managed with psychiatric care and medication, but since the Perkins family were devoted Scientologists, that was obviously not an option, to receive treatment for a horrible, treatable disorder. And signs of Jeremy's deteriorating mental health were evident for years. He heard voices, talked to people who weren't there, he had increasingly bizarre behavior, and in 2002, he was arrested for trespassing on a university campus, telling police he was acting under the direction of the Roman goddess Diana. So even then, when a psychiatric evaluation was recommended, his mother Ellie was adamant that her religious beliefs prevented such treatment, which is a tragedy all around. Instead of seeking proper, real medical care, the Perkins family turned to Dr. Conrad Malfair, a Scientologist osteopath in Pennsylvania who had practiced alternative medicine. Malfair's diagnosis was the claim that Jeremy was suffering from high levels of arsenic and toxic metals in his system. Malfair recommended expensive chelation therapy, which removes heavy metals and toxicity from your blood. And when Ellie couldn't afford the $10,000 treatment, she decided to treat Jeremy herself with vitamins and supplements, which is the Scientology-approved alternative to psychiatric medicine. In the morning of the stabbing, Ellie was on the phone with a fellow Scientologist when Jeremy, her son, emerged from the shower, grabbed a knife from the kitchen, and attacked her. And the woman on the other end of the line heard the entire assault and immediately called the police and the Buffalo Scientology organization. What the f? Jeremy would later tell investigators that he had stabbed his mother 4 or 5 times before she fell down and continued the attack until she was dead. Within hours of the murder, a crisis team from New York City descended on Buffalo to help with the situation, I guess. Jeremy's ethics folder contained records of his mental health issues and the church's knowledge of his condition. That all disappeared mysteriously, never to be seen again, conveniently, perfectly. It's like the whole thing of Scientology. They document extensively and organize your thoughts and then use that to heal you spiritually. Like, that's the whole thing. So them not having that seems bizarre. By the actual law, Jeremy was found not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, and he was committed to a state psychiatric hospital where he finally received the treatment his family's religious beliefs had completely denied him. But the damage was already done. He murdered his mother, stabbed her 77 times as a result of his untreated mental illness. Now, obviously, Scientology denied any responsibility for the tragedy and claimed that Jeremy had never even been a member, despite documented evidence of this being the case and his participation in church activities. They just disconnected from Jeremy entirely because they can't atone for that. Now on to L. Ron Hubbard's sons. His first son quit Scientology in 1959, so obviously that's, not an option. His next son, Quentin Hubbard, he chose to be the one to groom and then eventually lead the Church of Scientology. Obviously, that didn't work out because of David Miscavige, but this is yet another case important to this story. Quentin didn't want to be what his dad wanted him to be. He didn't want to be a part of Scientology. He wanted to be a dancer. That's according to his Wikipedia. And former Scientologists have said that Quentin was a homosexual, and that's not okay in Scientology. Scientology classifies homosexuals as sexual perverts. And in 1975, Quentin was assigned in Clearwater, Florida, and was often absent from his duties, and shortly after that, he tried to take his own life. On October 28, 1976, 22-year-old Quentin was found unconscious near his car in Las Vegas and died 2 weeks later without ever regaining consciousness, which very mysterious. It seemed like he had tried to end his own life. L. Ron Hubbard reacted to the news by saying, and I quote, "That stupid kid, look at what he's done to me." What the Very suspicious overall. He was found without any identification, and his car's license plate had been removed and hidden under a rock disturbing, and Quentin's body showed signs inconsistent with his normal, meticulous appearance. He was unshaven, unkempt, conditions that people who knew him didn't believe he was in. There's a lot of speculation around his death, as it's one of the very first ones that marred Scientology. And to protect the church's image, Mary Sue Hubbard, L. Ron Hubbard's wife, told Scientologists officially that Quentin had died of encephalitis, which is a lie that many church believers, or whatever the f they are, still believe to this very day. The truth is, he either took his own life or he died under very mysterious, bizarre circumstances. Well, that is the truth as well. Not either or, both are maybe true. One of them is potentially true, the other one's definitely true. What makes this whole thing so suspicious and worth talking about, I feel like, is not the suspicious circumstances around all of these different events, but rather the systematic evidence that Scientology is causing these things. Like, it's totally obvious, completely obvious, beyond a reasonable doubt, that there is things that are leading to things that are then happening. And I just don't understand why people don't talk about it more, or people don't care more, or it's like the government still gives them tax exempt status. It just doesn't make any sense. The writing is on the wall. It just seems so obvious. And everything's the same. Lisa McPherson, the same policies are still there. Nothing has fundamentally changed within Scientology since Quentin, since Lisa, since Jeremy, and since Shelley, the queen of Scientology, went missing. It's fucking unbelievable. Anyways, completely tragic, completely funny. You don't have to comment, he's not, so no one's gonna do anything. No one's gonna do anything. Scientology's not gonna do anything. It's, there's too many videos. There's too much, there's nothing they can do about it. Pandora's box was opened long ago, and there's nothing at all that they will want to do because they just don't care, because it's not hurting them at this point. People are allowed to say whatever, and they can kind of just exist, and as they kind of just die off, they'll just, whatever, people will still become rich, but nobody new is joining Scientology. They're not really a threat. It's not a real scary thing like it was 10 years ago even. So it isn't some crazy giant thing that YouTubers are doing and content creators are doing when talking about this stuff. It's important, certainly, because it's unbelievable that it's still active, but it's not like, oh my God, they're in so much, it's crazy. Watch me die mysteriously really soon. It's not funny. I'm not gonna laugh at that. But for real though, there's nothing to worry about. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. Do not join Scientology. It is not a good religion. It shouldn't have tax exempt status, and L. Ron Hubbard can suck dick. I don't really know or care. If you guys enjoyed, press the like button, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, and leave some comments down below with different ideas on topics to cover, and I will see you guys in the next one. Go to sour.gg in the Gum Club, by the way, for uncensored videos. Thank you.